The transport shuttle docked with a soft metallic groan, and Sergeant Elias Morrow stepped onto Station Corathroman 4 with nothing but a duffel bag and a pair of running shoes tied to its strap. The station was massive. It stretched in every direction like a small city floating in the black of space, built to house thousands of soldiers from dozens of species across the Galactic Union. The air smelled clean and recycled, with a faint sweetness that was not quite right for a human nose. Morrow was 32 years old. He was not tall. He was not wide. He had the kind of body that looked like it had been carved down to only what was necessary. There were scars on his forearms and a long, pale line across his jaw from something he never talked about. His eyes were calm, the kind of calm that came from having already seen the worst things a person could see and deciding to keep going anyway. He was one of 5 humans sent to Corathroman 4 as part of the Galactic Union's new cross-species military integration program. The idea was simple. Different species would train together, learn from each other, and build the kind of trust that made joint operations possible. In practice, it meant a lot of confused aliens staring at humans and a lot of paperwork. The station's layout was divided into species-specific zones connected by shared common areas. Humans were assigned quarters in Block 7, which sat between the Velthari delegation and a storage wing. The Velthari were tall and thin, with hollow bones and feathered crests that shifted color with their moods. They moved like they were always afraid the floor might break beneath them. When Morrow walked past their open doorway on his way to his room, 2 of them stopped talking and watched him with wide golden eyes. He nodded politely. They did not nod back. His room was small and gray and perfect. A bed, a locker, a sink. He dropped his bag, pulled out his running shoes, and set them by the door. Then he sat on the bed and read through the station orientation file on his datapad. The file told him what he already knew. Corathroman 4 used adjustable gravity plating throughout the station. Each species trained in their native gravity inside designated pods. Humans were assigned Pod 6C, set to 1 times Earth standard. The Gorath, a heavy gravity species whose homeworld pulled at 2.4 times Earth normal, trained in Pod 4A. There were also environmental stress test chambers that could go much higher, but those were listed under equipment testing, not personnel use. Morrow read that part twice. The next morning, all new arrivals gathered in the station's main briefing hall. Commander Dresk stood at the front. He was Gorath. That meant he was enormous, nearly 3 meters tall, wide as a cargo loader, with thick plates of natural armor covering his shoulders and back. His species had evolved on a crushing world where everything was heavier, denser, and harder to kill. Dresk moved with the slow confidence of someone who had never once in his life been afraid of falling down. He welcomed the new soldiers. He explained the training schedule, the shared facilities, the rules about interspecies conduct. His voice was deep and flat, like rocks grinding together. When he got to the human contingent, he paused and looked at Morrow and the 4 others with something that was not quite curiosity and not quite dismissal. "Humans," Dresk said, "you are assigned Pod 6C 1 times your native gravity, standard cardiovascular and resistance training. If you require dietary adjustments, file a request with medical." Morrow raised his hand. Dresk looked at him the way a mountain might look at a bird. "Are there open pods with higher settings?" Morrow asked. "I would like to train above baseline if possible." A few species in the room turned to look at him. A Velthari officer near the back made a small clicking sound with her beak. Dresk studied the human for a moment. "The Gorath heavy track in Pod 4A runs at 2.4 times Earth standard," he said. "It is open to any species that signs a liability waiver. I would not recommend it for your kind." "Understood," Morrow said. He did not say he would not do it. He just said understood. Dresk noticed the difference but said nothing. After the briefing, the new arrivals dispersed. Morrow changed into his running gear and headed to the station's shared atrium, a wide open ring that circled the station's core at standard gravity. It was meant for walking, socializing, light exercise. Trees from 6 different homeworlds grew in planters along the edges. The ceiling was high and curved, with simulated sunlight that shifted through the day. Morrow stretched for 2 minutes, then he started to run. It was not a sprint. It was the kind of run that looked easy until you realized it never stopped. His feet hit the ground in a steady rhythm, his breathing even and controlled, his arms loose at his sides. He moved like a machine designed for exactly this. Not fast, not flashy, just relentless forward motion that ate distance without appearing to try. He ran for 40 minutes. Several species passed him during that time. A group of Velthari researchers on their way to a lab stopped and watched him go by. One of them, a tall female with silver-tipped feathers and a compliance badge on her vest, held up her datapad and ran a quick calculation. Her name was Tiliani Vorshek, and she was the station's safety and welfare compliance officer. The number on her screen told her that the human sustained pace would qualify as a dead sprint for her species. Not a jog, not a brisk walk, a flat-out emergency flight response sprint. And the human was doing it the way someone else might hum a song. Casually, without effort, for 40 minutes. Tiliani had read the human file before they arrived. She knew what Earth was. A Class 12 death world. A planet with tectonic instability, extreme weather, apex predators in every biome, and a dominant species that had evolved not by being the strongest or fastest, but by being the one thing that never stopped chasing. The file used the term persistence predation. It had given her nightmares for 2 nights. Now she was watching it happen in front of her. A predator that did not need to be fast because it simply never stopped. She opened a new file on her datapad. She typed the header slowly, her thin fingers trembling just slightly against the screen. Preliminary observation, human baseline locomotion. She watched Morrow round the far curve of the atrium, his pace unchanged, his breathing still even, and she thought to herself that she was going to need a much bigger file. Over the next 2 weeks, Morrow fell into a routine that the station learned to set its clock by. Every morning at 5:30, he appeared in Pod 6C, ran for an hour at Earth gravity, and returned to his quarters for breakfast. Other species noticed him the way they noticed weather. He was just there, a constant, a human doing human things in the background of their day. Tiliani noticed more than most. She had access to the station's environmental logs, and she checked them every evening as part of her compliance duties. For the first 7 days, Morrow's activity was unremarkable. Pod 6C 1 times gravity, 60 minutes, heart rate elevated but stable, no flags. On day 8, the log showed something different. Morrow had entered Pod 4A at 6:30, immediately after his regular session. Pod 4A was the Gorath heavy track, 2.4 times Earth gravity. Tiliani read the entry twice. She pulled up the session data. He had walked, just walked, 12 laps around the track at a pace that the system classified as impaired ambulatory movement. His heart rate had been high. His blood oxygen had dipped, but he had completed the session, signed out, and gone to breakfast. She flagged it in her weekly report as atypical but within safety parameters. The station did not restrict species from entering pods above their native gravity. It just did not expect anyone to volunteer for it. Morrow came back the next day, and the day after that. Each time he stayed a little longer, each time he moved a little faster. On day 11, the log showed he had jogged for the first time in 2.4 times gravity. Not fast. A heavy, grinding pace that the system estimated placed roughly 600 kilograms of effective force on his skeletal structure with each stride. His body was not built for this. Every bone, every joint, every tendon was operating far beyond its design limits. He did not complain. He did not talk about it. At night, alone in his quarters, he filled a bag with ice from the mess hall dispenser and pressed it against his knees and ankles until the swelling went down. His shins ached in a way that lived somewhere between pain and warning. He ignored both. The Gorath soldiers in Pod 4A noticed him by the end of the first week. At first they said nothing. Humans were small, fragile-looking. Watching one try to run in Gorath gravity was like watching a child try to carry a boulder. Amusing, briefly, and then forgotten. But Morrow did not stop coming. By the second week, he was running full laps alongside the Gorath morning squad. He was slower than all of them. His form was ugly compared to their powerful, ground-eating strides. But he was there every single morning, and he finished every single session. A Gorath lieutenant named Keth was the first to acknowledge him. Keth was younger than Dresk, but built from the same mold. Thick, armored, heavy. He had fought in 3 border skirmishes and carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly how much damage he could take and give. One morning after the session, Keth stopped in front of Morrow while the human was bent over, hands on his knees, breathing hard. The Gorath looked down at him with an expression that most species would have read as blank, but that Morrow recognized as evaluation. "You are slower than our youngest recruit," Keth said. Morrow straightened up. "Yes." "You are in obvious physical distress." "Yes." "You will come back tomorrow." It was not a question. Morrow met his eyes. "Yes." Keth gave a single nod. It was small and brief, and it meant everything. Among the Gorath, respect was not given for talent. It was given for refusal to quit. That evening, Morrow sat in his quarters and pulled up the station's full environmental manifest on his datapad. He scrolled past the standard training pods, past the species-specific habitats, past the recreational zones. He found what he was looking for under the section labeled Stress Test and Equipment Evaluation Chambers. Pod 9X adjustable gravity up to 8 times Earth standard. Designed for testing cargo equipment, hull materials, and heavy species endurance under extreme load conditions. Not designed for personnel training. Not prohibited for it either, as long as the user signed the appropriate waivers. Morrow tapped on the reservation system. The pod was available at 400 station time. Nobody used it that early. Nobody used it for running at all. He set the gravity to 6 times Earth standard. He confirmed the reservation. He set an alarm for 3:45 and put the datapad down. His knees ached. His shins throbbed with the deep bone pain of microfractures that were already healing, because that was what human bones did. They broke under stress and rebuilt themselves stronger. It was one of the many things about human biology that other species found deeply unsettling. Damage was not a setback for humans. It was a building material. Morrow turned off the light and lay in the dark, thinking about gravity, about what it meant to carry weight that was not yours, about a squad of soldiers on some future world where everything was heavier and slower and harder, and one of them goes down, and someone has to carry them out. That someone needed legs that worked, lungs that worked, a body that had been told what 6 times its own weight felt like and had been trained to answer with forward motion. He was not training for himself. He had never trained for himself. Every run, every fractured shin, every ice-backed night was for someone he had not met yet, on a world he had not seen, in a fight he hoped would never come but knew it would. He fell asleep quickly. Soldiers learned to sleep whenever they could. 3 floors above him, Tiliani Vorshek was still awake. Her datapad chimed softly with an automated alert from the station's reservation system. She picked it up, read the notification, and felt her feathers go flat against her skull. Anomalous gravpod reservation. Pod 9X setting, 6 times Earth standard. Occupant SGT. E. Morrow human, time 400. She stared at the screen. 6 times. 6 times Earth gravity. The Gorath, the heaviest species on the station, trained at 2.4 times. Their homeworld's gravity was considered extreme by galactic standards. 6 times was not training. 6 times was a crushing force that turned atmosphere into syrup and bone into powder. 6 times was what happened to cargo containers and engine mounts, not living creatures. She stood up from her desk. Her crest feathers, which shifted color with her emotional state, had gone from their usual calm blue to a sharp, alarmed orange. She paced twice across her small office, then stopped and looked at the alert again. She could cancel the reservation. She had the authority. A safety compliance officer could flag any activity that posed unreasonable risk to station personnel. This was clearly, obviously, unmistakably unreasonable. But the human had signed the waiver. The pod was not restricted. And some part of her, the part that had watched him run for 40 minutes on his first day without breaking stride, the part that had read his species file and lain awake, imagining a world that forged creatures like this, that part wanted to see what would happen. She set her own alarm for 3:50. She would be at Pod 9X before him. She would observe. She would document. And if it went wrong, she would be there to call medical. She did not sleep well. In the dark of her quarters, she could hear the distant hum of the station's gravity generators, and for the first time since arriving, the sound made her afraid. The corridor leading to Pod 9X was cold and empty at 3:55 station time. The lights were dimmed to their night cycle, casting everything in a pale blue glow that made the metal walls look like the inside of a frozen river. Tiliani walked quickly, her thin legs clicking softly against the floor. She carried her datapad in both hands like a shield. She reached the observation gallery first. It was a narrow room with a reinforced glass wall that looked down into Pod 9X. The pod itself was large, circular, and bare. No equipment, no padding, just a flat gray track that looped around the interior with distance markers painted on the floor. The gravity plating beneath it could simulate conditions that would crush most living things into wet paste. Tiliani activated the pod's external monitoring systems, biometric sensors, atmospheric readers, floor pressure plates. She linked them all to her datapad and sat down on the bench facing the glass. Her feathers were orange. They had been orange since she woke up. At 400, the pod's main door opened and Morrow walked in. He wore standard training clothes, shorts, a compression shirt, running shoes. He carried nothing else. He looked small in the empty pod, a single figure standing in the center of a space designed for testing whether starship hulls could survive planetary re-entry forces. He walked to the control panel by the door and entered his settings. 6 times Earth gravity, gradual onset over 10 seconds, session timer set to 30 minutes. He confirmed the settings, stepped back to the starting line, and pressed the activation switch. The gravity hit him like a hand, pressing down from the sky. Tiliani watched his knees buckle slightly as the plating engaged. His body, which weighed 84 kilograms at Earth standard, now weighed 504 kilograms by the measure of his own bones and muscles. His spine compressed. His shoulders dropped. His chest visibly tightened as his lungs fought to expand against the pressure. Every organ in his body was being pulled downward with a force that the Galactic Union Safety Manual classified as non-survivable for sustained biological activity. He stood there for a moment, just breathing. Each breath was a visible effort, his ribs expanding against the weight of the air itself, which now pressed down on him like a thick liquid. His face was tight, not with fear, with concentration. He was recalibrating, adjusting, learning what his body could do under conditions it was never meant to face. Then he took a step. It was heavy and deliberate, like watching someone walk through deep water. His foot hit the floor and the pressure sensors on Tiliani's datapad spiked into numbers she had never seen for a biological organism. The impact traveled up through his leg, and she could see the vibration in his shoulders. He took another step, then another. He reached the track and turned onto it. His pace was slow, barely faster than a walk, but his legs were moving in the rhythm of a run, short, controlled strides, arms pumping close to his body, head down, eyes fixed on the track ahead of him. He was running, in 6 times Earth gravity, where every step meant driving 500 kilograms of effective weight into the ground, and then lifting it again, where his heart had to pump blood that now weighed 6 times as much through vessels that were being squeezed by the pressure, where his lungs had to drag in air that felt like breathing through wet cloth. Sergeant Elias Morrow was running. Tiliani pressed her hand against the glass. She did not realize she was doing it. He completed the first lap. His time was slow. Over 4 minutes for a track that he could run in under 60 seconds at normal gravity, but he completed it. The biometric data on her screen showed his heart rate at 190 beats per minute. His blood oxygen was dropping. His cortisol levels were spiking. Every number was a warning. Every number said stop. He started the second lap. Behind Tiliani, the gallery door opened. She turned and saw Keth standing in the doorway. The Goreth lieutenant filled the frame completely, his massive body blocking the corridor light. He looked past her, through the glass, and went very still. "What is he doing?" Keth said. "Running," Tiliani said. The word sounded absurd even as she said it. Keth moved into the gallery and stood beside her. He did not sit. More shapes appeared behind him. Commander Dresk, 2 Goreth soldiers, a Narathi engineer whose 4 eyes were all locked on the pod below. Word had spread through whatever invisible network connected soldiers across every species. Something impossible was happening in Pod 9X, and they had come to see it. Morrow finished the second lap. His form had deteriorated. His stride was shorter, more ragged. His arms moved like they were fighting through mud. Sweat ran down his face and neck in thick streams, pulled to the floor by the gravity so fast it looked like he was standing in rain. The floor beneath him was dark with it. He started the third lap. Halfway through, his nose began to bleed. A thin line of red ran from his left nostril down over his lip and dripped onto his shirt. He wiped it with the back of his hand without breaking stride. He did not slow down. The blood smeared across his cheek and he kept moving. Tiliani heard Dresk exhale. It was a low sound, like a deep engine settling. She glanced at him. The Goreth commander was watching Morrow with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It was not amusement. It was not confusion. It was the look of someone watching a fundamental law of nature being broken by something that should not be able to break it. "His species baseline is 1 times, Dresk said quietly to no one in particular. 1 times. Fourth lap. Morrow's breathing was audible now, even through the reinforced glass. A ragged, rhythmic roaring that sounded less like breathing and more like an engine being pushed past its limits. His legs moved in a grinding, mechanical pattern that had nothing to do with grace and everything to do with refusal. Each step was a war between gravity and Will was winning by the smallest possible margin. Fifth lap. His biometrics on Tiliani's screen were screaming. Heart rate at 208, blood pressure in critical range, microfractures detected in both tibias, muscle fiber tearing in his quadriceps. His body was breaking, not slowly, not gently. It was coming apart under forces that it had no evolutionary preparation for, and the man inside that body was still running. He started the 6th lap. 10 meters in, his legs gave out. He dropped to his hands and knees. The impact of his knees hitting the floor at 6 times gravity sent a visible shockwave through his body. The gallery flinched as one. Tiliani's hand flew to her mouth. Keth took a half step toward the glass, every armored plate on his body shifting with the sudden movement. Morrow stayed on his hands and knees. He breathed. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3. Each one was a shuddering, full-body effort that moved his entire frame. Blood dripped from his nose onto the track. Then he put 1 foot on the ground, then the other. He pushed himself upright. His legs were shaking so badly that Tiliani could see it from the gallery. His face was white except where the blood was red. His eyes were focused on something that was not in the room. He walked. He could not run anymore, so he walked. 1 step after another, slow and grinding and absolutely unrelenting, around the remainder of the 6th lap. When he reached the control panel, he slammed his palm on the emergency shutdown. The gravity dropped to normal. The silence was instant and total. Morrow collapsed against the wall and slid to the floor. His chest heaved. His legs were stretched out in front of him, useless and trembling. Blood was on his face and his shirt and the floor around him. He was grinning. Through the blood and the sweat and the shaking, he was grinning with every tooth showing because he had done it. The universe had told him to stop, and he had said no, and he had meant it. In the gallery, nobody spoke. The silence lasted 10 seconds, 20, 30. It was the loudest silence Tiliani had ever heard. Then Commander Dresk said, in a voice so quiet it barely reached her ears, "What is wrong with them?" Nobody had an answer. Tiliani looked down at her datapad. Her hands were shaking so badly that she almost dropped it. She opened the formal complaint system and stared at the blank form. The header read Galactic Union Safety and Welfare Compliance, Incident Report. She did not know what box to check. There was no box for what she had just witnessed. There was no category for a creature that broke its own bones against gravity and smiled about it. There was no form in the entire Galactic Union's administrative system that accounted for this. She began typing anyway. Her report would be 17 pages long. She did not know that yet. She only knew that her fingers were moving, and somewhere below her, a human was sitting in a pool of his own blood and sweat, still grinning, still breathing, still alive in a way that made her question what that word truly meant. Tiliani finished her report at 900 the same morning. It took her nearly 5 hours to write. She had gone through 3 cups of stimulant tea and 1 brief period of staring at her wall in complete silence, trying to find words in the Galactic Union's official language that could describe what she had watched Elias Morrow do to himself. The final document was titled Formal Safety Objection. Human bipedal locomotion under non-survivable gravitational load, 6.0 times species baseline. It was 17 pages long. It included biometric data, frame-by-frame analysis from the pod's sensors, floor pressure readings, and a medical summary she had compiled from the station's automated health monitoring system. It included the phrase, "The subject appeared to be experiencing catastrophic musculoskeletal distress and continued regardless, 4 separate times, because she could not think of a better way to say it, and because it kept happening at different points in the recording." She filed it through the official compliance channel at 9:03. By 9:20, it had been read by the station's administrative office. By noon, it had been forwarded to the Galactic Union's Joint Military Oversight Board. By evening, it had been copied to 14 different species delegations and had generated more internal traffic than any safety complaint in the station's history. The reason was simple. The complaint and the biometric data attached to it proved that a human being had run in 6 times Earth gravity. Not walked, not crawled, run. This was a thing that should not have been possible. The physics of biological locomotion, the limits of bone density and cardiovascular function and muscular endurance, all said it should not have happened. But the data was clean and the sensors were calibrated and the footage was unedited, and it had happened. Within 24 hours, 3 separate species delegations had filed formal requests asking whether humans should be reclassified. The current designation was Class 12 Deathworld Origin, which placed them in the same category as several large predatory species from other hostile environments. The proposed new classification was Class 15, Active Environmental Hazard. The difference, in bureaucratic terms, was the difference between a dangerous animal and a natural disaster. Morrow, meanwhile, was in the medical bay. He had gone voluntarily after the run, which the medical staff noted with visible relief. The examination revealed what Tiliani's data had suggested: microfractures in both tibias and his left fibula, strained ligaments in both knees and his right ankle, burst capillaries in his face and across his shoulders, elevated cortisol, depleted glycogen, mild internal bruising around his kidneys from the sustained gravitational stress. The medical officer, a Narathi named Solis who had 4 arms and a calm professional demeanor, treated the injuries, and then sat down across from Morrow, with an expression that was halfway between clinical concern and personal disbelief. "Your bones are already healing," Solis said, reading from the scan results. "The microfractures are filling with new growth, denser than before." "That is how it works for us," Morrow said. "Your species responds to structural damage by reinforcing the damaged area." "Yes." Solis looked at him for a long time. "You knew this would happen. You knew your body would break and rebuild." Morrow did not answer right away. He flexed his right hand open and closed, testing the grip. "I knew it was possible," he said finally. "There is always a chance it does not go that way." "And you did it anyway." "Yes." Solis made a note in the medical file. Morrow could not read Narathi's script, but he imagined it said something like "patient is aware of risk and does not care." The hearing was scheduled for the following afternoon. It was held in the station's formal review chamber, a cold room with curved benches and a raised panel table where 3 senior officers sat. Commander Dresk was one of them, representing the station's training division. The other 2 were a union oversight official and a species integration specialist who had been called in specifically for this case. Tiliani sat in the complainant's chair. She had rehearsed what she would say. She had charts and data and a clear argument that the station's safety protocols needed to be updated to prevent humans from accessing gravity environments that exceeded 3 times their baseline. It was reasonable. It was well supported. It was exactly the kind of careful, evidence-based recommendation that the Galactic Union's compliance system was designed to produce. Morrow sat across the room. He was in clean fatigues. The bruises on his legs were visible below his shorts, a mottled landscape of purple and yellow that mapped exactly where the gravity had tried hardest to break him. He sat with his hands on his knees and his back straight and waited. The panel asked Tiliani to present her case. She did. She was thorough and professional. She walked them through the biometric data, the injury report, the risk assessment. She explained that no species on the station, including the Gorath, routinely operated at 6 times their native gravity. She explained that the human body was not structurally rated for such conditions by any standard medical reference in the Union's database. She recommended restrictions. The panel thanked her and turned to Morrow. "Sergeant," the oversight official said, "can you explain why you chose to train at 6 times Earth gravity?" Morrow was quiet for a moment, not because he did not know the answer, but because he was choosing words that would make sense to people who had never needed to think about it. "I am a drop soldier," he said. "My unit deploys to contested worlds. Some of those worlds have high gravity, 2 times, 3 times, sometimes higher. If my squad lands on a world like that, I need to be able to move. I need to be able to fight. And if one of my people goes down, I need to be able to carry them out." He paused. The room was very still. "I do not train for myself," he said. "I train so that someone else gets to go home." Tiliani felt something shift inside her chest. It was not a physical sensation. It was the feeling of a framework collapsing, a way of understanding the world that had seemed solid and complete suddenly revealing that it had a hole in it the exact shape of a human being. She had filed her complaint based on safety, on the idea that a person should not be allowed to damage themselves beyond what was reasonable. And the human sitting across from her had just told her, simply and without drama, that his definition of reasonable included breaking his own bones in the dark at 4 in the morning so that someday, on some world she would never see, he could carry a wounded comrade through gravity that should have killed them both. His framework for safety was not about preventing harm to himself. It was about ensuring he could function when harm was inevitable. He was not reckless. He was preparing for a reality that her species had never had to imagine. Dresk spoke next. His voice was the same flat grind it always was, but Tiliani thought she heard something underneath it. "The human completed the exercise voluntarily," he said. "He maintained consciousness throughout. He terminated the session himself using the emergency controls. He reported to medical within 30 minutes. By Gorath training standards, this qualifies as a valid endurance assessment. The panel deliberated for less than 10 minutes. The ruling was no violation. New guidelines were recommended. Humans accessing gravity pods above 3 times their native baseline would be required to file a training plan and maintain current medical clearance on record. Morrow accepted the conditions without argument. The room emptied slowly. Tiliani gathered her datapad and her 17 pages of careful documentation and walked toward the door. In the corridor outside, she passed Keth, who was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. He had been waiting. As Morrow exited, Keth straightened. The Gorath lieutenant looked down at the human with the same evaluating gaze he had given him weeks ago in Pod 4A, but something in it had changed. There was weight to it now. Recognition. "What did it feel like?" Keth asked. 6 times. Morrow thought about it. He rolled his right shoulder, which was still stiff, and looked up at the massive soldier standing over him. "Like the planet was trying to keep me," he said, "and I said no." Keth stared at him. Then he laughed. It was a short, low sound that came from somewhere deep in his armored chest, and it was the first time Tiliani had ever heard a Gorath laugh. That evening, Tiliani sat in her office and formally withdrew her complaint. The system asked for a reason. She typed for a long time, deleted it, typed again, deleted it again. Finally, she wrote a note and attached it to the file. "I do not believe Sergeant Morrow is a danger to himself. I believe he is the product of a world that never stopped trying to kill his species, and they adapted by refusing to stop moving. I am amending my risk assessment. The danger is not that humans will harm themselves. It is that they will make the rest of us believe we can follow them." She saved the file. She turned off her datapad. She sat in the dark for a while, listening to the hum of the gravity generators, and thought about a species that treated broken bones as building materials and pain as a training partner. And she wondered what kind of world you had to come from to think that was normal. She did not have an answer. She was not sure she wanted one. 3 months changed Station Corathroman 4 in ways that no integration program had planned for. Morrow still ran every morning. That had not changed. What changed was everything around him. The atrium, which had once emptied when he passed through, now had regulars who timed their walks to coincide with his run. They did not join him. They just watched, the way someone might watch a river. Not because it was exciting, but because there was something steady about it that made the rest of the day feel more solid. In Pod 4A, the Gorath heavy track, 3 of Dresk's soldiers had started running with Morrow at 2.4 times gravity. They were faster than him. They were stronger than him. But they had started coming because of him, and everyone on the station knew it. Keth ran beside him most mornings, shortening his massive stride to match the human's pace. They did not talk during the runs. They did not need to. The language they shared was older than words. It was the language of showing up, of being there when it was hard, of moving forward because stopping was not something either of them knew how to do. Tiliani had changed too. Her reports on human integration had become the most requested documents in the Galactic Union's welfare archive. Officers from 12 different species delegations had cited her work. 2 universities had asked permission to include her observations in their xenobiology programs. She had been offered a permanent research post studying human adaptability, and after a week of consideration, she had accepted. She told herself it was a career decision. It was practical. It was the logical next step for someone with her qualifications and access. She knew the truth was simpler. She had watched a man run until his bones cracked in the dark, and she could not stop thinking about why. Not the physical why. She understood the biology now, the way human bones rebuilt themselves under stress, the way their cardiovascular systems could be pushed beyond theoretical limits through sheer repeated exposure. What she could not stop thinking about was the other why, the reason behind the reason. The thing that made a species look at a force that should destroy them, and choose to step into it anyway. She was still thinking about it when the alert came. It arrived at 1400 on a Tuesday, flagged priority read across every command channel on the station. A Galactic Union science outpost on a world designated Rithak 7 had gone silent. The outpost housed 43 researchers from 6 different species. Their last transmission, received 11 hours earlier, reported a massive incursion of hostile xenofauna from the planet's deep wilderness. The creatures were large, aggressive, and generated localized electromagnetic pulses that disabled electronic equipment within a 50-meter radius. Rithak 7 had a surface gravity of 4.8 times Earth standard. The implications hit the station's command staff within minutes. At 4.8 times gravity, standard-powered exoskeletons were the only way most species could operate on the surface. But the xenofauna's EMP ability meant that anything electronic would be dead within moments of contact. No powered armor, no mechanized support, no robotic assistance. The rescue would have to be conducted with nothing but biological capability against a world that weighed nearly 5 times what most species were built to handle. The call went out for unpowered ground extraction volunteers. The message was straightforward: personnel capable of sustained physical operation at or above 4 times Earth gravity without powered assistance. High-risk engagement with hostile fauna. No guarantee of extraction support if primary systems were compromised. Morrow's hand was up before the message finished. His 4 fellow humans were right behind him. Dresk assigned Keth and a Goreth-heavy team as ground support. The Goreth could operate at 2.4 times their native gravity, which put them at roughly 5.7 times Earth standard, but only for short periods and with significant physical cost. They would hold the landing zone on a lower elevation plateau where the gravity was slightly reduced, providing a fallback point for the extraction team. The dropship launched at 1600. Tiliani was on the support vessel, assigned as welfare observer. She had not been ordered to go. She had requested it. The approval came through in 4 minutes, which she suspected meant that someone in command wanted an official record of whatever was about to happen. The drop was rough. Rithak 7 was a dark world, thick with atmosphere and covered in dense vegetation that looked like it had been pressed flat by its own weight. Everything grew low and wide, spreading outward instead of upward, because reaching toward the sky on this planet was a losing fight. The landing zone was a cleared ridge 3 kilometers from the outpost. The Goreth team deployed first, securing the perimeter with heavy weapons that did not rely on electronic targeting. Then the humans went down. Morrow hit the surface and felt 4.8 times Earth gravity close around him like a fist. His body went from 84 kilograms to just over 400. His boots sank into the soft ground. His spine compressed. His vision narrowed as his heart immediately began working harder than it had ever worked, harder even than that morning in Pod 9X, because this was not a controlled test in a clean room. This was a hostile world with things in the dark that wanted to kill him, and the gravity was trying to help them. He took a breath. It felt like inhaling through a wet blanket. He checked his weapon, a ballistic rifle with no electronic components, mechanical sights, spring-loaded magazine. It weighed, at this gravity, roughly the same as a small motorcycle on Earth. He lifted it to his shoulder and started moving. The 5 humans advanced through the vegetation in a loose formation. Their pace was slow by any standard. Each step was a deliberate act of defiance against a planet that was trying to press them into the dirt. They communicated with hand signals because talking required breath they could not spare. Sweat soaked through their gear within the first 200 meters. They found the outpost at the base of a shallow valley. The buildings were damaged. 3 of the outer structures had been torn open by something large. Emergency lights flickered inside, the only system still working because they ran on chemical batteries rather than electrical power. The xenofauna, massive 6-legged creatures covered in bony plates, had retreated to the tree line. Their EMP pulses crackled in the air like static, visible as faint blue flashes among the dense undergrowth. The researchers were inside the main building, 43 of them, most injured, some barely conscious. The lighter species, Velthari, Narathi, and others, were in the worst shape. Their bodies were not made for this gravity even under normal conditions, and the stress of the attack had pushed them to their limits. Morrow assessed the situation in 30 seconds. The researchers could not walk out. Most could not stand. The humans would have to carry them. He did the math in his head. 43 researchers, 5 humans, 3 kilometers to the landing zone. At 4.8 times gravity, carrying another person meant carrying them at nearly 5 times their weight on top of his own already crushing load. The numbers were impossible. He started anyway. They worked in relays. Each human carried one researcher at a time, moving as fast as they could manage, which was barely faster than a walk. The lighter species they could carry on their backs. The heavier ones they dragged on improvised stretchers made from torn wall panels. Every 100 meters they stopped, set down their loads, breathed, and picked them up again. Morrow carried a Velthari scientist on his back for the first trip. She was barely conscious, her hollow bones grinding under the gravity, her feathered crest limp and gray. She weighed almost nothing by Earth standards, but at 4.8 times gravity she felt like a sack of concrete strapped to his shoulders. He held her legs with both hands and moved forward, one step at a time, his knees bending deeper than they should have, his spine curving under the load. He made the 3 kilometers. He set her down at the landing zone where the Gorath medics were waiting. He turned around and went back. He made 8 trips. Each one was slower than the last. On the 6th trip, he felt something give in his left femur, a hairline fracture, sharp and hot, like a wire being drawn through the bone. He shifted his weight to his right leg and kept walking. On the 7th trip, his right knee made a sound like tearing fabric and a bolt of pain shot from his ankle to his hip. He locked the joint straight and dragged himself forward in a stiff-legged gait that looked like a broken machine refusing to shut down. On the 8th and final trip, he carried a Narathi engineer who was unconscious and bleeding from a head wound. The engineer was heavy. Morrow's body was finished. His vision was tunneling. His lungs felt like they were filled with sand. Each breath tasted like copper. Both legs were failing, held together by nothing but adrenaline and the absolute refusal to put down the person on his back. He reached the landing zone and collapsed. Not gracefully, not dramatically. He simply stopped being able to stand and went down like a building with its foundations removed, twisting at the last moment so the Narathi engineer landed on top of him instead of the ground. The Gorath medics pulled the engineer off him. Morrow lay on his back in the dirt of a world that weighed nearly 5 times what his home did, staring up at a sky he could barely see, and breathed. Every researcher was recovered, all 43 alive. 3 humans needed immediate trauma care. Morrow was the worst. Hairline fractures in both femurs, torn ligaments in both knees, partial collapse of his left lung from sustained pressure, burst capillaries across his entire body that made him look like he had been painted red from the inside. He was conscious when they loaded him onto the medevac shuttle. He was always conscious. That was the thing about humans that frightened other species more than anything else. They stayed awake for all of it. Tiliani was there. She had come down from the support vessel the moment the last researcher was confirmed safe. She stood over Morrow as the medics worked on him, her datapad in her hands, her feathers cycling through colors she had no name for. He looked up at her. His eyes were bloodshot and unfocused, but he saw her. He recognized her. One corner of his mouth twitched. "I should file another complaint," she said. He laughed. It was a small, broken sound that clearly hurt, and he did it anyway. "What would you call this one?" Tiliani looked at him. At this shattered, bleeding, impossible creature from a world that had spent 4 billion years trying to kill everything on it and had produced, as its final answer, a species that simply refused to stay down. A species that broke its own bones to prepare for moments exactly like this one. a species that carried strangers through crushing darkness because someone had to and they had decided it would be them. "I would call it evidence," she said. He closed his eyes. He was smiling. 6 months later, the Galactic Union published an updated species integration manual. The section on humans had been completely rewritten. The old entry had described them as moderate threat, high adaptability, persistence endurance predators. The new entry was authored by senior researcher Tiliani Vorshek, and it read, "Humans do not overcome obstacles. They absorb them. They integrate damage into function, convert pain into momentum, and treat physical limitation as a temporary administrative error. They are not the strongest species in the Union. They are not the fastest. They are, however, the only species that will run in 6 times their native gravity and then ask for a 7th lap. Classification has been updated accordingly. All stations housing human personnel are advised to stock additional medical supplies, reinforce their gravity plating, and prepare for safety complaints that will, ultimately, be withdrawn." The entry's risk classification box, which Tiliani had once spent an entire night agonizing over, now contained a single handwritten annotation. It had been added by Commander Dresk personally, approved without revision by the Joint Military Oversight Board, and translated into every language in the Union's database. It read, "Do not attempt to keep up.